Well, I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. I only found out about 10 minutes ago I was going to do this. But what I wanted to talk to you about is Newport before the Wedge. The Wedge is down at the end of the peninsula, as you know, and it has the phenomenon of the waves that it does because of the jetty that is there. Well, 100 years ago, there was no jetty. And 150 years ago, there was no peninsula as we know it. It was just a marsh. And there was a huge storm, like a 100-year storm they had in 1861, 62 that winter. And it washed so much sand. The Santa Ana River used to empty and go through what is now the bay. And it washed all this sand and basically in one season created the peninsula. So imagine if it could be created that quickly, maybe a little bit fragile place to be, but of course we have all this infrastructure holding it down now. So then in the early, around 1990, there was another series of big floods, and that's when the river kind of broke through with a little help from some locals because they didn't want it destroying what they had at the harbor, and so they emptied it, so made it empty out where it does now, and so that created the harbor, which is not affected by the Santa Ana River anymore. But it was a very treacherous opening. In fact, the reason why the Newport Pier is there is because they tried getting boats into the harbor, and the original landing was over where the castaways is, where the bridge is over there. But they couldn't get over the sandbars, which were always changing. And you never knew from one day to the next where the sand was going to be and where there was an opening in the channel. And boats would get stuck there, people would be killed and drowned, and it was just a mess. And so they started trying to get bond issues passed. Sometimes they would get a little bit, and they got a little funding for a few rocks on the west side, but it wasn't adequate. And so beginning in the 1920s, there was a big effort to try to get more funding, and voters voted down this bond and that. Nothing happened much. And then a great thing happened. The stock market crashed. It was wonderful, because when the Roosevelt administration came in a few years after that, because they blame whoever the president is for whatever's bad going on, that hasn't changed. But under the Roosevelt administration, the WPA, Works Progress Administration, was looking for shovel-ready projects. And we had one here in Newport Beach. And so a local businessman and booster went to Washington, lobbied the Congress and the senators, and Senator McAdoo, who was a Democrat, and the Roosevelt administration, and they went to the Army Corps of Engineers, and they got a plan, they got funding, and by 1936, both sides of the jetty were done, and the one jetty on the west side was extended farther, and that is what created the Wedge. And Newport Beach has never forgotten and forgiven the Democrats for doing that. They voted Republican ever since. So that's all I can say about that. The history of the Wedge since then is going to be covered by the next few people. So there you go.